All right, so now that we've looked at the different types of bonds and the different ways that these atoms can combine with one another and unite, we're going to start looking at how we write and name different chemical formulas or different compounds that are formed by these different atoms coming together. Okay, so we're going to do this together. You're going to want to take notes, and if you need to pause the video, feel free. Okay, so the first thing we have to do as we go before we continue is that I need to let you guys know that there's a difference between writing a chemical formula and naming a chemical formula. Okay, so when I say that we're writing a chemical formula, that means that we're actually using the atomic symbols as we're writing down a chemical formula. So for example, H2O is a written form of water. Okay, naming, on the other hand, is something you would say to a friend. Okay, so sodium chloride is something that you would say to a friend, right? You would probably say pass the salt instead of sodium chloride, but you certainly wouldn't say, hey, can you pass me some NaCl? That could get really, really, really redundant if you're trying to say all these letters and numbers out. So instead, we give these chemical compounds a name that you and I can use. Okay, so once again, the chemical formula, writing that formula, is when we use those symbols. Naming are the actual words. It's when I use those words to describe a chemical formula. Okay, so for example, potassium sulfide is a name. K2S is the written form. That's using the atomic symbols. That's what I would write down on a piece of paper. Okay? All right, so in order to figure out how we're going to write and name all these different chemical compounds, we're going to use something called the stock system. Right, so the stock system is kind of like a set of rules which we've turned into this mathematical formula, blah, 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 that we can actually use to figure out the name and the written formula of a specific compound. We're going to look at that together. Okay, so basically what the stock system is telling us is that if I have a chemical compound, one molecule that's ionically bonded is going to have a net charge equal to 0. In other words, if I take the charge of each individual atom within that molecule and I add up all the charges, I should get 0 in the end. So, in other words, some of the atoms in that molecule are going to want to take electrons, and some of the atoms are going to want to give electrons away. But in the end, that one molecule should be balanced out. All right, so real quick, take a second to review. How do you know if a chemical is ionically bonded? Because it's important when we're using the stock system that we make sure that we're talking about a molecule that's put together by ionic bonds. Okay, so what I want you to do is take a second, pause this video, and take the survey on the Moodle page to see if your answer is correct. Then come back and we'll continue with looking at an example of the stock system. All right, so hopefully you paused the video and you went back to the Moodle page. You've refreshed it if you needed to, and you should have seen a little quiz that popped up or a little survey, and you should have taken that. All right, now we're going to start to look at how the stock system can be used to help us figure out what the name and the formula of a specific chemical compound is. All right, so in this video, I'm just going to show you the different parts of this mathematical thing, and then in the next video, we're going to look at an example of it. Okay, so real quick here, what I have on the screen is a bunch of lines and parentheses. I want you to actually write this down in your notes. Okay, this is going to be kind of our skeleton formula, if you will. We're going to be plugging things into this, but every time we try and make a chemical formula, this is the first thing that we're going to write down. Okay, so you'll notice I have a line, a set of parentheses, a plus sign, and then another line, set of parentheses, equals 0. So in other words, all of this stuff over here has to equal 0. It's going to end up balancing out, which is what the stock system told us. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to assign part of this to one atom or one type of element and another part of this to a different type of element. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to write on this page, and I want you to follow along and write this down in your notes as well. If you need colored pencils, you can ask me, or if you want to just use one type of pencil for your notes, that's fine. But you're going to want to make sure you write all of this down in your notes. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this side to the metals. I'm going to say whatever the metal is, it's going to belong on this side of the equation. I'm going to give that the color red. Now I'm going to use blue over here for this side of the equation. I'm going to call this the non-metal side. So anytime I have a metal, I'm going to put it over on the left. That's going to be the first thing I put in. And then anytime I have a non-metal, I'm going to put it on the right. Okay? Now, this equation looks really scary, but it's got some very, very simple rules. Okay, so for example, if I look at the metal side, this line, on this line, I'm always, always, always going to put the number of atoms or ions that I have in that compound. Okay, so whatever's on this line, whatever ends up here, is going to be the number of atoms or ions that I have in this chemical compound. All right? Now, what's really simple about this is that the same thing is true on this side with the nonmetals. But here, we're talking about the number of atoms or ions of nonmetals. Okay, so whatever goes on the line, whether it's metal or nonmetal, is always the number of atoms or ions. Now, there's a little note here that goes with these guys, so I'm going to put a little star, right? Whatever number we put on these lines can never be equal or be negative. Okay, so it can never be negative. And that should make sense, right? I can't have a negative number of atoms or a negative number of ions. It just doesn't work that way. I can't have negative something, all right, negative matter. So these numbers, both in the metal slot and the non-metal slot, have to be positive, okay? Now, as for these parentheses, here I have the number of atoms. In these parentheses, I'm going to put the oxidation state. And of course, this will be the oxidation state of the metal. And on this side, it'll be the oxidation state of the nonmetal. All right, so whatever goes in the parentheses is always going to be an oxidation state. Now these can be negative. So I'm going to put a little star here. They can be negative. Usually it'll be on the non-metal side. We're going to look at why in just a little bit. Okay? So that's the basic structure of the stock system. That's where all of this information goes. Now, keep in mind, we have to follow our order of operations. So I have to multiply, when I'm plugging all of this information in, I have to multiply the number of atoms or ions times the oxidation state, and do that both over here and over here separately. Then I add them together to equal 0. Okay, that's really important because we're going to have a lot of pluses and minuses floating around here, but it's important that you multiply this times this and this times this before you add the two pieces together. Okay? All right, so here's what I want you to do. First thing you're going to do is you're going to go to the textbook, and I want you to take a look at page 616 to 618. All right, there are some diagrams, and it's a different way of looking at how we're going to put these different atoms and molecules together. All right, just to help you out a little bit. Then what I want you to do is go onto the Moodle page and take a quick quiz just to let me know that you're on board with this. All right? If you don't see the quiz show up on the Moodle page, refresh the page and it should show up. If it still doesn't show up after you've refreshed the page, come and see me. The next thing you're going to do after you've taken that quiz is watch the next video. In the next video, I'm going to go over a couple of examples with you on how to use the stock system. In fact, I'm going to do an example for you on each page of the packet I've given you. So make sure that you have your packet handy with you when you start to watch the next video. All right, good luck.